Millie always knew that marrying a soldier would bring challenges. Loneliness was part of her routine, but the emptiness of Francis's absence became unbearable on nights when the silence seemed to scream louder than any sound. The house they shared was spacious, but without him it felt cold, deserted, and lifeless. During one of the rare calls from the front, Francis, his voice weary, asked Millie to try to improve her relationship with Lily, his mother. The request weighed heavily on her heart, as it was an open wound she preferred never to revisit. But her love for Francis spoke louder, and she promised to try. This promise, however, would be the trigger for a chain of events that would forever change her life. She clearly remembered the first time she felt Lily's hostility. It was on the most special day of her life, her wedding. The cruel gesture of spilling red wine on her wedding dress was no accident, but a calculated attack, veiled by a false apology. From then on, every encounter with her mother-in-law felt like a battlefield, with forced smiles and sharp words disguised as advice. Even so, Millie was willing to honor Francis's request. Perhaps deep down, she believed that time could soften the rough edges and make room for a new relationship. The first steps were cautious. Millie decided to invite Lily to her house for coffee, preparing every detail with care, hoping that small gestures could create new memories. But Lily, with her judgmental looks and sharp tongue, turned the encounter into a session of veiled criticism. "This cake is good, for someone with no talent in the kitchen," she said, smiling cynically. Millie swallowed hard, remaining calm, telling herself that this was just the beginning of a long process. Little did she know, however, that this attempt at reconciliation would only serve to rekindle old wounds. Francis's calls were always a mixture of love and duty. He insisted that Millie not give up, that Lily was her only family besides her. Millie listened silently, her heart aching, knowing that her struggles with Lily would never be understood by Francis, who had always seen his mother as a strong and resilient woman. It was a heavy weight to carry this truth alone, while pretending everything was fine. But she kept trying, not for Lily, but for the man she loved, believing that her effort would be a gift of loyalty to him. Fate, however, had dark plans. That promise to try to improve the relationship would not be just a gesture of kindness, but rather the beginning of a painful journey where Lily's every word would become a blow and every smile a trap. Millie didn't know it yet, but this path she chose would be paved with humiliation, tears, and ultimately justice. For the woman she tried to accept into her life would one day show her true colors in a way so cruel that even Francis couldn't ignore it. Millie's wedding day should have been remembered as the happiest of her life, but it turned into a day of pain and humiliation. The ceremony was impeccable, every detail carefully planned to reflect the love between her and Francis. But Lily, with her calculating gaze and a false smile on her lips, harbored a cruel plan. As the guests celebrated the bride's entrance, she feigned a stumble and spilled red wine on Millie's white dress. The silence that followed was suffocating. Everyone believed it was an accident, but Lily's almost imperceptible, satisfied look betrayed her intention. For Millie, that gesture was more than a stain on the fabric. It was the beginning of a silent war that would change her life forever. As the guests commented on the misfortune, Lily acted as if she had made only a trivial mistake, offering a theatrical apology. But deep down, everyone who knew her difficult temperament. Francis, too emotional to grasp the gravity of the situation, comforted Millie, saying that nothing could ruin that moment. She smiled, but harbored her hurt as if hiding an open wound beneath her dress. The wedding went ahead, but the symbol of that act remained etched in her mind. Her mother-in-law had staked her claim, making it clear that she would do anything to tarnish her happiness. After the ceremony, their relationship was never the same. Millie, who previously believed she could win Lily over with affection and respect, realized she was facing a woman willing to use any weapon to destabilize her. At every family gathering, the dress incident returned like a bitter memory. Lily seized every opportunity to make passive-aggressive comments, always disguised as a joke. "If she can't even protect her own dress, how will she protect my son?" she would say, laughing, as if it were just a joke. But for Millie, every sentence was a sharp blade. Over time, resentment built like layers of stone on Millie's heart. She struggled to keep the peace for Francis, but the weight of Lily's hostility followed her every step. Her mother-in-law seemed unable to accept another woman occupying the central place in her son's life, and the closer Millie tried to get, the more the hostility intensified. The marriage, which should have been a haven of love and support, began to be overshadowed by this constant shadow. Even though Millie tried to hide it, the pain showed in her tired eyes, in the tears she held back at the end of each meeting. The cruel gesture on their wedding day had been just the first blow in a long series. Lily refused to share Francis and used every opportunity to reaffirm her position. Millie, for her part, tried to resist in silence, believing that one day she would be recognized not as an enemy, but as part of the family. But deep down, a painful truth was beginning to form in her mind. Lily would never accept her presence. That spilled wine hadn't been just an accident. It had been a warning, and Millie, even trying to delude herself, knew that this conflict would only be the beginning of a war that was far from over. Millie knew the weight of resentment was unbearable, but her love for Francis drove her to try again. After so many wounds opened by her mother-in-law, she wanted to walk away for good, but the memory of the promise she made to her husband echoed in her mind. She decided to swallow her pride and give their relationship another chance. She prepared dinner in her own home, arranging every detail as if it were a gesture of surrender. The table was decorated with fresh flowers. The aroma of home-cooked food filled the room, and her heart beat faster in anticipation that, perhaps, Lily would finally see her as part of the family. But as soon as Lily walked in the door, the mood changed. Her gaze swept the room with a judgmental air, like someone inspecting an unfinished work. "You did all that? What an effort." "I hope it's not just for show," she said, her usual venom in the air. Millie swallowed hard and served dinner, trying to remain calm. As the cutlery clanged against the plates, Lily's words became invisible blows, veiled comments, comparisons to other acquaintances' daughters-in-law, veiled criticisms of Millie's household management. It was like sitting before a court where she was already condemned, and yet Millie insisted on maintaining her composure. After that night, Millie felt drained, as if every attempt at closeness was sucked dry by Lily's arrogance. Yet in calls with Francis, she softened the truth, saying only that things were moving along. She didn't want to burden him with the pressures of his military mission. What Francis didn't know was that, after each encounter, Millie returned to her room crying silently, hiding the pain even from herself. She repeated to the mirror, "I can do it. It's just a matter of time." But the reflection showed an exhausted woman, caught between loyalty to her husband and the veiled war with her mother-in-law. The following week, Millie tried a new approach. She invited Lily to accompany her to a craft fair in town. Perhaps in a light and relaxed setting, they could find some common ground. But the experience was again marked by sarcasm. Lily criticized the prices, mocked the pieces Millie praised, and made a point of reminding aloud that Francis would never waste money on useless things like that. Millie felt exposed, embarrassed in the eyes of others, as if reduced to a naive child being scolded by her mother. It was on that day that she began to realize that perhaps this battle could not be won with kindness. Even in the face of so many disappointments, Millie still wouldn't give up. Her love for Francis was the strength that kept her going, even when every attempt resulted in frustration. She clung to the hope that one day Lily would open her heart, even if only a little. But deep down, something was beginning to shift within her, the realization that her patience had a limit. The constant effort to please someone she could never win over was draining her soul, and a silent part of her was already preparing the ground for the rebellion to come. Rediscovering her own strength was inevitable, and when it happened, Lily wouldn't be ready to deal with what Millie had become. Millie's patience was slipping like sand slipping through her fingers. Every encounter with Lily was a cruel test, and with each venomous comment, the pain in her chest turned into something closer to fury. For months, she had swallowed humiliations, hiding behind forced smiles. But that day, something snapped inside her. The trigger came one Sunday afternoon, when Lily, in front of neighbors and acquaintances, insinuated that Millie had only married Francis for convenience. After all, who else would accept living on their own without working? The silence that fell around her was deafening. Millie looked at her mother-in-law, and for the first time she didn't look away. The confrontation was about to explode. Millie took a deep breath, but her voice was firm, filled with years of accumulated pain. "Enough, Lily. I will no longer accept your insults, nor your cruel way of treating me as if I were a burden. You may fool others with that false smile, but I know who you are." Lily's expression faded in seconds. The shock in her eyes was replaced by restrained anger, as if someone had dared to challenge her on her own turf. The guests, once silent accomplices, now watched expectantly, unable to believe what they were witnessing. The confrontation grew in intensity. Lily tried to defend herself, raising her voice, stating that she always wanted the best for her son and that Millie was ungrateful for not recognizing her efforts. But Millie didn't back down. The words flowed like a long suppressed outburst. If you truly wanted the best for Francis, you would have respected his choice. You never tried to know me, you only tried to destroy me. But today I say, it's over. You no longer have power over me. It was at that moment that the tears fell, not from weakness but from liberation. Lily, out of control, resorted to manipulation. Francis would never believe you. He knows who I really am, she said, almost shouting. But Millie, firm, replied, one day, even he will see. The truth always comes out, even if it takes time. The heavy silence that followed made it clear that this was no longer a veiled war, but an open battle. The confrontation had exposed hurts that had been buried since the wedding, and there was no turning back. That night, alone in her room, Millie cried like she hadn't cried in a long time. They weren't tears of defeat, but of liberation. For the first time, she had faced Lily head-on, without masks, without fear. The war between them had reached a new level, but something inside Millie had awakened. The weight she carried began to transform into strength, and she finally understood that she no longer needed to live in her mother-in-law's shadow. The path to her revenge was not yet set, but the decision not to remain silent had never been made. After her open confrontation with Lily, Millie realized that their coexistence had become unsustainable. Each visit from her mother-in-law was marked by arguments or resentful silences, and the house that should have once been a home now felt like a constant battlefield. The energy of the place was permeated with hostility, and Millie could no longer breathe peacefully within her own walls. Francis, from afar, still urged her to be patient, but for the first time, Millie made a decision that didn't require his approval. She was moving. She needed air. She needed a space free from Lily's shadow. Finding the new apartment was almost like finding a piece of herself, small, simple, but bright, with a balcony where the morning sun streamed in without asking. It was everything she needed, a space to start over, where she could rebuild her life away from the suffocating presence of her mother-in-law. When she signed the lease, Millie felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, she wasn't just reacting to the circumstances Lily had imposed on her, she was choosing her own path. This choice, though difficult, was a silent act of resistance and liberation. The move itself was symbolic. Each box Millie packed seemed to carry with it a piece of the weight she carried. Painful memories were left behind, while each object placed in the new home took on renewed meaning. Loneliness was still a part of her life, as Francis remained on his mission, but now it was a chosen solitude, filled with hope rather than suffering. It was as if she had finally regained control of her own story. Even from a distance, Francis supported her decision. While he didn't fully understand the depth of her conflict with Lily, he respected Millie's courage in seeking her own peace. Her words spoken during a late-night phone call were like a balm. If this place brings you peace, then that's where you belong. I trust you, Millie. This support, even if indirect, was confirmation that she was on the right path. Lily would no longer have as much access to her, and that in itself was a victory. In her new home, Millie found not only a refuge, but also a chance to reconnect with herself. Her nights were no longer filled with tears of frustration, but with reading, soft music, and dreams of a better future. It was a silent yet powerful new beginning. With each dawn, the memory of her toxic mother-in-law faded further away, and the flame of her inner strength burned brighter. Millie didn't yet know what fate had in store, but inside that small apartment, she felt ready to face any storm, including the greatest of all, which was yet to come. 3 months had passed since the move, and Millie finally felt her life was getting back on track. The small apartment, once empty, now brimmed with warmth and symbolized the fresh start she so desperately needed. The walls held only her peace, no longer the echoes of her arguments with Lily. It was the eve of her birthday, and Millie decided to celebrate in a simple but special way. She baked a cake, arranged flowers on the table, and played soft music to set the tone for an evening of reflection and gratitude. For the first time in a long time, she felt she had reason to smile without masks. As she lit the candles, her phone vibrated. The name that appeared on the screen made her heart freeze. Lily. For a moment she considered ignoring it. After all, nothing good could come of that call. But the persistent notifications turned into a long, furious message. Lily accused her of pushing Francis away, stealing her son and shaming the family. Words laden with venom mingled with a cruel revelation. You think you won, but today I got my revenge. I broke into your house and destroyed everything. I want to see you smile now." Millie read the message over and over, trying to believe the absurdity of those words. Anger and disbelief mixed in her chest. Her old home, which no longer belonged to her, was now the stage for Lily's sickening revenge. The cruelty of choosing her birthday to reveal the act showed that her mother-in-law sought not only to cause material harm, but also to steal her joy. Millie took a deep breath, feeling her heart race. But at the same time, a strange sense of power began to form within her. Calling back, Millie heard Lily's altered voice filled with hatred and satisfaction. "You should never have confronted me. Now you know what happens to those who take my son away from me." Millie remained silent for a few seconds, letting her mother-in-law pour out her accusations. Each word revealed not only malice but also desperation. When she finally answered, her voice was calm, almost cold. "Lily, you have no idea what you just did." The silence that followed was heavy, as if the air itself had been cut off by her answer. As Lily laughed on the other end of the line, believing she had won, Millie knew the truth would change the game completely. Because the house Lily believed was hers had been gone for months, the destruction she had so boasted about hadn't reached Millie, but another target, and that would make her downfall inevitable. Gripping her cell phone tightly, Millie felt this would be the final chapter of the war. For the first time, she wouldn't have to lift a finger for justice to be served. The call continued, filled with venom. On the other end of the line, Lily couldn't contain her fury. Her voice, trembling yet triumphant, hurled accusations like sharp stabs. "You stole Francis from me. Ever since you came into his life, my son has distanced himself from me. And now look, I've finally shown you who's boss." There was a pause, followed by a bitter, almost maddened laugh. "I broke into your house, Millie. I ripped out your mementos, destroyed your furniture, broke every object that might have given you peace. I even made sure to shred your wedding photos. Now you know what it's like to lose everything." Millie pressed the phone to her ear, each word echoing like thunder. But, contrary to Lily's expectations, there were no screams or cries on the other end. There was only silence, a silence that carried more weight than any impulsive response. Lily continued speaking, intoxicated by the feeling of power, believing she had finally won the war. "You can try to deceive Francis, but I will always be above you. Today I proved it. Today you lost." The words came fast, filled with resentment, as if they were ammunition in a war only she believed she was winning. It was then that Millie took a deep breath and, with an almost frightening calm, replied, "Lily, you didn't destroy anything of mine. This hasn't been my home for months." The silence that followed on the other end was deafening. Lily stammered, trying to laugh, but her voice lost its firmness. "No, it can't be. I saw your things there. Insecurity began to erode her false confidence. Millie continued cold and firm. "The house now belongs to the new town marshal. You haven't touched my life. You've only dug your own ruin." On the other end, Lily's breathing became ragged. Her arrogant tone disappeared, replaced by palpable anxiety. "You're lying. This can't be true," she repeated, as if trying to convince herself. But deep down she knew. She had rushed into this, driven by blind hatred, and now she was trapped in a trap of her own making. Millie didn't need to do anything else. Lily's own mouth had confessed her crime, and the destruction of the wrong house would make any apology impossible. Millie, her voice firm and calm, concluded, "I've always tried to live in peace, but you chose war. Now, Lily, it's not me who will have to face the consequences. It's you." And before her mother-in-law could respond, she hung up the call. The sharp sound of the ending echoed like the snap of a final sentence. Lily, once smiling and victorious, was now plunged into panic, realizing that her supposed revenge had become a death trap for her reputation, her freedom, and ultimately for the dominance she believed she had over everyone. The news hit Lily like a bolt from the blue. On the other end of the line, her voice, previously thick with arrogance, now turned into nervous stutters. "Chief, what do you mean by that?" Millie remained calm, almost savoring the impact of her words. "Yes, Lily, the house you destroyed is no longer mine. It now belongs to the new town chief who will be moving in within a few days. And guess what? Not only did you commit a crime, but you chose the wrong victim, someone with enough power to ensure you pay every penny for what you did." The silence that followed was even more satisfying than any scream. Lily tried to regain control, but her voice cracked with every word. "You're lying. This is a trick. It has to be." But the desperation in her tone betrayed her knowledge of the truth. Millie, for her part, no longer carried the pain she once had. Now she held the power, and she used each word like a precise blade. You always believed you could humiliate me with impunity, but now it's not me you'll have to face. It's the law. And this time, not even Francis will be able to protect you. Lily's rapid breathing was almost audible, a symphony of fear replacing the false superiority she so often displayed. The revelation of the twist was the final blow that shattered Lily's pride. Her mind whirled in despair, trying to calculate the consequences. The trespassing, the destruction of property, and worst of all, the fact that the victim was the sheriff. This meant her downfall would be public, inevitable, and devastating. Millie, you have to help me. If Francis finds out about this, he'll never forgive me, she pleaded, her voice now cracking. But Millie showed no mercy. Her silence was the cruelest answer she could give, and when she finally spoke, her voice was charged with justice. I tried for peace, Lily, but you chose war. Now accept the consequences of your choices. In that moment, Millie realized that the sweetest revenge wasn't screaming, nor retaliating with the same cruelty she'd suffered. It was simply letting Lily be crushed by the weight of her own actions. Fate had conspired in her favor in an almost poetic way. Her mother-in-law's blind hatred had led her straight to her downfall. And Millie, contrary to what Lily had always believed, didn't need to lift a finger beyond freeing herself from the past. Justice this time wouldn't come from her hands. It would come from the law itself. Hanging up the phone, Millie felt an indescribable relief. The chain that bound her to Lily's shadow had finally been broken. She knew that soon the news would spread, and the entire town would know the true face of the woman who had humiliated her for so long. The irony of the situation was almost cinematic. Lily, who believed she had control over everything, had placed herself at the center of her own destruction, and Millie, for the first time in years, could breathe in peace, knowing that life was finally giving her back what was rightfully hers. When the realization dawned, Lily despaired. The arrogance that had always accompanied her evaporated like smoke, giving way to raw fear, the kind that paralyzes even words. On the other end of the line, her voice trembled. Millie, you can't let this happen. I'm Francis's mother. If he finds out, if the authorities find out, I'll lose everything. Please help me. The desperation sounded almost pathetic, coming from a woman who had always used the force of humiliation as a weapon. Now, however, she was no longer the queen of the show, but the defendant in her own tragedy. Millie closed her eyes and took a deep breath. For a moment, she remembered all the times she'd swallowed insults, all the nights she'd cried in secret, all the futile attempts to please Lily. This wasn't just revenge, it was poetic justice. In a calm, almost cold voice, she replied, I've always tried to live in peace, but you gave me no choice. Now it's not me you'll have to deal with, it's the law. And honestly, I don't intend to lift a finger to save you. The silence that followed was more devastating to Lily than any insult. On the other side, Lily began to sob. The woman who had once laughed at Millie's defeats now cried like a cornered child. I can't be arrested. I can't, she pleaded, promising to change, promising to treat Millie with respect. But it was too late. The wheel of fate had already turned, and there was no turning back. Millie stood firm, not allowing pity to weaken her. There's no point in begging, Lily. You chose this path. I just moved on with my life. Now you're the one who will have to deal with the consequences of your own choices. With every passing second, Lily's panic grew. Her mind raced, trying to find an impossible way out. But the truth was relentless. There was no way to erase what she had done, no way to justify the destruction of a house that no longer belonged to her daughter-in-law. The cruel irony was that her own words had been the most damning evidence, confessing to the crime in a phone call. Millie didn't need to record anything. She could just let Lily sink in with her own words. As she hung up the phone, Millie felt strangely light. There was no anger, no euphoria, just the feeling that a cycle was finally coming to an end. For once, she wasn't the one who needed to fight. Life, the law, and the consequences would take care of the rest. As Lily despaired, Millie simply allowed herself to smile. The woman who had made her bleed in silence for so long would now taste the bitter taste of her own actions. Justice hadn't failed. It had merely waited for the right moment to act, and that moment had arrived. The news quickly spread through the small town, where every incident became the talk of the town on street corners, in markets, and in cafes. Lily had been arrested. The destruction of the police chief's house not only caught the attention of the police, but also made local headlines. The woman who had always prided herself on her reputation as a respectable matriarch was now seen as a criminal. Neighbors who had previously feared her for the venom of her words now held her up as a shameful example. This downfall was public, ironic, and devastating. The mask had slipped. Millie learned of the arrest through a phone call from a friend, and in that instant, she felt the weight of years of suffering lifted from her shoulders. There was no cruel joy in her heart, only relief. Lily was finally facing the consequences she had always believed she could avoid. And most symbolic of all, Millie hadn't needed to act violently, nor had she taken direct revenge. Fate itself had arranged the circumstances so that justice would be served. Millie simply went her own way, and Lily stumbled upon her own hatred. When Francis returned from his mission, he was shocked by what he discovered. At first, his grief was profound. This was his mother, after all. But when he looked at Millie, he understood how much she had endured in silence. For the first time, he saw clearly the weight his wife had carried to maintain peace. He hugged her tightly, promising he would never let her go through that again. And together, they decided to move forward without looking back. Lily's chapter was closed, and their future was finally free of the suffocating shadow that had so imprisoned them. While Lily faced the loneliness of a cold cell, abandoned even by the acquaintances who once surrounded her, Millie rediscovered life. She began to smile again, to plan trips, to dream of new projects. The small apartment, which had once been a refuge, now became a home full of hope. With Francis by her side, she rediscovered the lightness of life without the constant threat of humiliation. With each new dawn, Millie celebrated her silent victory, not only for being free of Lily, but for having proven to herself that she was capable of enduring, resisting, and ultimately triumphing. The moral of the story: the evil we sow always finds a way back, and the choices we make determine the fate we reap. Lily believed she was in control, but her own hatred was the weapon that destroyed her. Millie, however, despite being wounded, never stopped seeking peace, and for that was rewarded with freedom and happiness. If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's that justice may be slow, but it never fails. And now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? If you felt the same catharsis Millie experienced at the end, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what struck you most about this journey of pain, upheaval, and triumph. Your opinion is crucial, and get ready because even more intense stories are coming.